Hi there, good afternoon. Episode 5, thankfully, the last one of Conveyancing and Lockdown, and hopefully how we emerge therefrom. Today is one I've been hoping to talk about for a while now, because it's something which is probably quite misunderstood, and that is the fact that it reflects the fact that there are lots of things in the conveyancing process which are actually outside the solicitor's control. But when this information or documentation isn't available, lawyers tend to get the blame for it, even though it's not our fault. So, for example, property certificates and searches, that's obviously outside our control. Those are done by statutory agencies. There have been issues with those during the period of lockdown, with court offices being either closed or in limited functionality. We have felt somewhat reluctant to rely necessarily on the updatedness of the data which is being used to produce those searches, particularly with bankruptcy. Obviously with statutory charges searches as well, that's part of land registry, and that was hit by land registry's closure at the start of lockdown, albeit as we know things have loosened, and in fact I think statutory charges searches were one of the 7 key services that land registry indicated that they would restart over the last couple of weeks. I suppose the things which are really outside our control are lenders and surveyors. Surveyors have obviously been hit by the lockdown in that physically they haven't been able to actually get out to properties, or feel unable to go out to properties, and that obviously then impacted on lenders. Lenders were also somewhat concerned, to say the least, at the lack of functionality of land registry at the outset, where a public register statutory body responsible for registration of ownership in Northern Ireland just suddenly was deemed non-essential and closed. That has obviously loosened over the time, and as I say, this new one today is a very good positive. We had been negotiating in cases individually with lenders actually, because we couldn't give unqualified certificates of title, because we couldn't undertake to do some of the things in relation to land registry. It looks as if from the 8th of June, and you're going to hear this date a lot in the next couple of minutes, we will be able to give pretty much unqualified certificates of title again, and that's going to be very good for those cases which can complete. Don't forget, all of this is predicated on the fact that we are still in lockdown. I've just watched the Minister and Deputy First Minister indicating that there's no real loosening of the lockdown over this bank holiday weekend. So in theory it is still largely unlawful. It's in breach of the regulations to move house unless it is reasonably necessary. And we do need to sort of bear that in mind as we go forward. But let's get to the big news. Land Registry have produced today a revised emergency note to practitioners, and essentially, long story short, from the 8th of June, pretty much we're returning to something like full functionality, in that they are accepting new applications for the actual land registry register. We can post those applications now, albeit they will be held and deemed received on the 8th of June. Most of the issues about priority searches and priority search applications and what those actually mean have also been dealt with, or will be dealt with, and the 8th of June is going to be a bit of a red letter day for all of that. That's going to be helpful. Let me see. They're open today for correspondence. The building itself is not open to the public, or I presume law searchers, and I suppose that's the way that, and obviously we're now at the point where we need to start thinking about no longer working remotely, or working less remotely, and thinking about some sort of a physical return to the office on a more permanent basis. As I say, predicated by the fact that the lockdown hasn't been loosened as yet, and therefore we still need to comply with that. So we need to be thinking about that. But it certainly looks as though we are edging towards an element of normality. Certainly getting land registry back to some level of functionality is a really positive thing. I am delighted to see that. There has been so much misinformation and lack of understanding and lack of proper interpretation of what some of the previous practitioner practice notes actually meant. But this one today, when you read it in accordance in conjunction with the other previous practice notes, it's actually looking pretty good. And I've spoken to a couple of my colleagues, and we had a Zoom meeting earlier, just to make sure that I just wasn't dreaming this, and this was actually the case. So I think, despite the fact that, and I cannot stress this enough, we haven't officially heard that anything is reopening. The Northern Ireland property market is not reopening officially or anything like that, but it's obviously a great sign that Land Registry is going to return to some functionality, or some full functionality, or close to, in and around the 8th of June. And I suppose that's as good a date as any for the rest of us to start sort of working towards, in terms of maybe having more of a presence in the office, subject to what the Northern Ireland executive says. It does bring me back to sort of what we do at that point. We do have a lot of cases where we've either signed contracts virtually, or we are ready to sign contracts virtually, but at the moment we haven't released them. Those contracts will be released with COVID-19 special conditions. I talked about this at length yesterday, and if you didn't watch episode 4 of this series, I really would ask you to watch it. I think it is actually arguably the most important of the 5 that I've done this week, just in terms of how we do navigate a course through this sort of potentially post-lockdown or property market restart period. There must be flexibility in the market. We must have the case where our clients are protected if someone further down the chain from them has a COVID-like event, to be defined at a later date, suffers a COVID-like event on the day of completion, and suddenly none of the properties in the chain can complete, and then our client is suddenly sued by our vendor, who is suddenly sued by maybe a developer at the top. We need to make sure that our client has flexibility where they can say, no, this is a COVID condition. We're not saying that completion has been abandoned, or that we're rescinding the contract, or it's been frustrated. We're saying that it has actually been temporarily delayed, and as soon as we can complete, because maybe someone at the end of the chain is coming out of self-isolation, we will do that. So as I say, I suggested yesterday, I implored anyone listening that we build some flexibility into the process, that we potentially have a set of agreed special conditions by the profession that all of the parties have to sign up to. I sort of repeat that aspiration, and certainly, as I say, we are drafting our own set of special conditions at the moment, which we hopefully will feel is a reasonable balance between the parties, and all of our contracts will go out with those special conditions on them. But as I say, I'm glad this is the last episode in this series, and I'm glad even more that I'm ending this on something of a positive. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of challenges ahead. I suppose particularly, and I spent so much time on LinkedIn and social media and speaking to people over the last couple of weeks, and I really thank everyone who's spent time speaking to me and giving me their indication as to what they think the market is like. We know that there is this avalanche of people just waiting to move house as soon as they can get a physical viewing of the property, and there's a bit of a roadmap for how that's being done in England. It may well have a similar roadmap here, but I do wonder what it's going to be like after that. Once all those people have sort of washed through, is there going to continue to be a steady stream of people wanting to move house, or does it all peter to a halt again? And that is even quite apart from the fact that there may be another peak or what have you. I think any large-scale conveyancing firm will be worried about sort of new cases coming in, and certainly, when we go back, if we're sort of starting from scratch with new cases, it's going to be maybe 8, 10, 12 weeks before the cash flow comes in for those. That's something that all firms are going to have to contend with. So as I say, there are still challenges, but I think today the fact that Land Registry seems to have indicated a return to full functionality, or close to, over the next couple of weeks is good. I think it then gives us a bit of an impetus just to push forward in terms of getting our stuff together. Nearly said something else there, in terms of sort of getting back into the office in some shape or form when we're allowed to do so, and the lockdown is loosened or eased. So look, I just want to end this by thanking everyone so much for their comments and their views and their engagement. I remain very much open to private messages and engaging with any of the things we've talked about, particularly those COVID conditions that I'm looking to develop. And as I say, thank you again. Have a great bank holiday weekend and stay safe. Thank you.